Across the United States, immigrant communities are fearful. People are not answering knocks on their doors. Some are taping bedsheets over their windows and staying off social media. Some unauthorized immigrants are keeping their children home from school. From New York to Los Angeles, a series of immigration arrests have unleashed waves of fear and uncertainty across immigrant communities. Joining me to discuss this fear and what you and your loved ones should be doing are Tiffany Wheatland-Disu, Community Engagement Manager at the New York Immigration Coalition, and Mohammad Razvi, Executive Director of the Council of People's Organization. Welcome to Brooklyn45.
Thank you.
I know you've been doing lots of meetings all across Brooklyn, in particular, across New York, I'm sure. What are you hearing? What are you hearing from immigrants in particular?
Sure. Definitely a lot of concern about what will happen to them and their families. People are fearful in this moment, and rightly so. I think that they are looking for information. They want to know what rights they have, how to exercise those rights. They want confirmation of the news that they're hearing that's been shared very widely about raids and deportations. And they want to know, some people I think are really interested in knowing how they can get involved and protect themselves and their communities.
Similar thing. I mean, the most important thing what they're looking towards is about the future of their children, because many of these individuals who are fearful, they're fearful of their kids. I mean, they're like, our children are here. We were in the program with what Obama had issued regarding DACA program, and now the family members, I mean, even at these meetings and the vigils and the rallies that we're holding, they're coming to us and they're asking, what are the steps that we have to take? How do we make our families safe?
Let's talk about some of those steps.
So one important thing would be, if you are eligible, to definitely naturalize. We've been telling people that, in this period, especially when one of the executive orders that was introduced expands the grounds of deportation or of deportatable crimes, that the only thing that really protects you is citizenship. Another thing people should be informed of and aware of is to really be careful of having any interactions with law enforcement, to steer clear of committing any sorts of crimes, knowing where they can get legal assistance that's reputable, so making sure that they have good immigration lawyers, not allowing themselves to become victims of fraud. And this is something that I'm sure we all can attest to, that there is a heightened level of sense that people are being victimized by fraudsters. So really understanding how to get legitimate assistance.
So what we've been doing is, we've been actually at the rallies and at the vigils and all the community meetings. We actually we came up with a go bag. And basically the go bag has information, multiple information of what you should do and who you can contact. And which attorneys, for example, legal aid, where they have their sites, where it is free to speak to an attorney, a reputable attorneys. Most important thing what we're finding out is many individuals are turning towards notarios, these individuals who claim to be attorneys and are not providing the correct legal information for immigration to these individuals. We call them, everybody calls them notarios. So these are individuals who are not licensed, they claim to be attorneys and they're not attorneys. They're just notary public, and that's it, perhaps. And they just call themselves over notarios.
And they're giving immigration advice when they shouldn't be.
Absolutely, and so we have it in multiple languages, in Urdu, in Arabic, in French, in Spanish, and also in Chinese. And we're also, within this go bag, we also provide any type of issues that happen, for example, NYPD about hate crimes, because we're finding out that many people are going to be harassed, and they are. The things that you were mentioning, what they're afraid of, so this is one of the things that they're afraid of, and we're afraid of. This is the discrimination that happened after 9/11, many years back, where individuals who, because they were immigrants, because they were Muslims, fellow Americans discriminated against them. These are hundreds and hundreds of cases, which actually became a report with the Human Rights Commission, and ultimately led to policies and initiatives which changed. But this is something that is a huge fear that's coming down.
I know you mentioned earlier that people are pretending to be attorneys. We've been hearing recently that people are pretending to be from ICE.
That's right.
Let's talk about ICE and that they're approaching immigrants and taking monies from them under false pretenses,
That's right.
giving them promises that they can't do anything with.
Very recently, there was a report of an ICE raid in Jackson Heights that was subsequently disproven. And we discovered that, in fact, these were people posing to be ICE agents and coming to the door of immigrants and soliciting money and saying that essentially if you don't give us money, you'll be deported. And so there's a campaign out right now. We have lawyers at New York Immigration Coalition that are confirming these sorts of reports to make sure that we know what's actually happening and what's false news. It's really important, and this is something I think we'll both stress, that when you hear incidents of raids or of reports of people being detained, that they're confirmed before you share them. And so folks like our legal team in New York Immigration Coalition are really diligently working to capture those reports, to go and confirm them, to make sure that they're valid before sharing that information with the community. And I think that will help sort of tamp down the sense of fear that people are feeling, because it's really driving people underground.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the most important things, what happens and people don't realize in immigrant communities, the news travels like lightning. Forget about news media, forget about social media. When someone goes and tries to, for example, ICE agents at that moment in 2013, there were law enforcement agencies, federal, from immigration to INS at that time, to Homeland Security, to FBI, and also JTTF, Joint Terrorist Task Force, where they were picking up people. So when that happened in 2003, after 9/11, that information traveled like lightning and people were so afraid. Nobody went to really work. They tried to save all their money. Stores shut down because of no economy, no one spending their funds. This is what happens. We have to make sure, as she's mentioning, Tiffany, that we have to make sure get the right information to the right people. But more importantly, we need to make sure that they understand what their rights are. I mean, this is a time where if somebody is knocking on your door, first thing, you gotta ask, do you have a arrest warrant or a warrant to search the premises or of the individual? That's the most, and it has to be signed by a judge. Because sometimes, and it is very clear, sometimes the officers, they're assigned those types of warrants by themselves. If it's by the judge, is the one that you are trying to push on tremendously.
So some officers are legitimately signing the warrants?
But you should request the one from the judge, because that is the most important one. And yeah, absolutely, don't open your door. If they do not have a warrant at all, do not open the door. That is not to say have confrontation with them, but just say, hey, if you don't have the warrant, please, that's it. And only give your name and your address. And they might ask you for ID. One of the things that we're telling everyone is to get ID NYC. And we are a pop-up center right now in Brooklyn to provide ID NYC with the city of New York.
Okay.
It's important.
What is ID NYC?
So the ID NYIC is a municipal a municipal ID card that the Mayor's Office for Immigrant Affairs developed. And essentially, this is a card that anyone can apply for. You don't have to be an immigrant. You don't have to be documented or undocumented. It's a card that can be used for a number of things. You can use it to open up a bank account, to go to the library and check out books. You can use it for essentially most everyday things that people do in the city. And it's important, I think, because it doesn't disclose your immigration status. So for those who may not have another form of ID, except a passport or consular ID, this is a card that they can use safely without being fearful of having to disclose their immigration status or where they're from.
And you say you can pick this up easily from?
Yes, from a number of different pop-up centers.
Yes.
Such as COPO, Council of People's Organization.
That's your organization.
That's my organization. We have
Yes.
a pop-up center, and we are actually urging everyone to get that ID. And most importantly, this ID also provides a discounted, you go to the museum, free museums, you go to the Bronx Zoo, all these other initiatives that are connected with the ID. And it is one of those important things where we don't want individuals to carry, as he's saying, their passports or their consular identification. What they should do is just carry the ID, and anyone who asks anything, any question, if they're confronted on the street, at their workplace, they can show this as a form of ID.
You mentioned the word passport just now. I know lots of people are wondering if they should be afraid to travel and are afraid that somehow or other they're not going to be allowed to come back into the United States if they're from a country outside of the United States.
Right. It's a very valid concern. And what we at New York Immigration Coalition are advising people is, particularly if you don't need to travel, this is not the best time. You might want to wait a few months until we have more clarity around what's happening. One thing is, if you must travel, we obviously suggest that you check with an attorney to determine your level of risk in terms of re-entering the country. At this time, I think it's best that people avoid traveling and really consult with a lawyer if they have emergencies that should arise that would require them to travel.
Now, explain that. You said people. What category of people?
Right. So particularly.
So there are individuals who have green cards. So they're in a different category. But individuals who are on, you could say parolee visas, those individuals, they need to actually get permission to leave. We would suggest they never go at the moment. That's very important because they are individuals who are seeking asylum and they are given temporary work authorization. We're telling them they should not leave at this moment. They should just renew their IDs, the immigration IDs. Other individuals who have been here for multiple years, they still have green cards. We're just pushing them to become citizens, as Tiffany is saying, because we're part of the ONA, with the Office of New Americans, and we have been actually filing so many citizenship applications, and we're making sure any person who's here, who's eligible, please file for your citizenship. And we help them free, getting the citizenship test, help them with that, studying, and just get through the test. That is the most important thing you can emphasize to the people.
You are Muslim.
Yes.
What is the particular fear among Muslim immigrants?
So within the Muslim immigrants, what we have been pushing, because especially the individuals who are from the 7 countries that were being selected by the executive order, thank God these judges actually, kept up the, I think it was Judge
Robart.
From Washington. They upheld, those 3 judges upheld his decision, which is so wonderful because at this moment people are relieved, but they're still like, what's next? Because we're hearing that there might be another executive order issued or, they're going and, rethinking of how to issue it. However, be as it may, the Muslim community itself, like I was mentioning before, they are afraid from their fellow Americans to be targeted. Their fellow Americans are going to assume that, yeah, these are the Muslim individuals from these countries. They are our enemy. I just had so many people walking into my office, cab drivers, home health aid workers, individuals who are working in the Department of Education system, who are being harassed because of their attire, especially women, because they're wearing the traditional scarf.
Yeah.
She's saying, some individuals saying, and they're utilizing the word Trump as a hate word now. So it's becoming a hate word. Trump is here, you're going to get deported. Go back to your country. And literally, one cab driver told me, a guy, because he was driving slow. Yes. A cab driver was driving slow. The person in the back kept blowing the horn so much, he came out with a bat and he goes, Trump is here, and came out with a bat about to swing at him. And this is what's happening within the community.
Tiffany, you have an African background. What's the fear in the African community?
Sure. So, like Mohammad was saying, I think there's a lot of fear of hate crimes. A lot of people feel vulnerable in this moment, and I think they're looking for answers. They want to know how these executive orders will affect them. I think sort of like Mohammad was saying, another concern that we have, particularly for vulnerable communities, is that there's so many communities that don't really receive attention. So, Black immigrants, especially when the ban was lifted, we were concerned that, African immigrants in particular from those 7 affected countries would be targeted for hate crimes. But there's also another dimension that many immigrants that come from the continent actually are contributing heavily to our economy. 35%, up to 35% of all refugees actually come from the continent of Africa. And so the ban was particularly,
Repeat that again,
35% of all refugees actually come from the continent of Africa. in the U.S. And it wasn't something that was widely spoken about in the media, but we know that things like this ban, things like the detention and deportation of immigrants disproportionately affect Black immigrants, and it's not really publicly discussed. So what we also want to do, at least at the New York Immigration Coalition, is leverage the voices of Black immigrants in particular to let all of New York know that
Yes.
these are groups that are particularly vulnerable in this moment, and we need to come out and stand with them.
Now, what is the New York Immigration Coalition? What do you do?
So we are primarily a policy and advocacy organization representing some 175 to 200 member groups. And so we do a lot of policy work, a lot of advocacy at the federal, state, and local levels. And our motto was really to realize a New York City that is recognizing the contributions of all immigrants and that derives its strength and recognizes the strength that it derives from its immigrant communities. We have a number of campaigns that we're involved in. We've held actions since really Trump came into office, demonstrating that New York City will continue to stand with immigrants. We will continue to defend the rights of immigrants. And we have these campaigns that aren't just about immigration, but that are about protecting health rights, protecting education for all, and making sure that New York City remains an inclusive city.
But I know you want to say something.
Well, New York Immigration Coalition is one of the organizations when things were happening after 9/11. When we were formulating our organization, we joined with them. Since then.
Okay.
It's over 14 years ago. And it is amazing the work that we are able to do together. That's the most important thing.
What are some of the health issues and education issues that immigrants, especially illegal immigrants, are most concerned about?
Currently, under our law, hospitals, clinics do not share information with immigration. And I think, in terms of needing access to services, many immigrants, I think, are very hardworking, and there are many low-cost, affordable healthcare options around the city. So we want people to know that not only should they advocate and utilize their rights to access free healthcare services or low-cost healthcare services, but they shouldn't be fearful in this moment. They should continue going to visit the doctor. They should continue sending their children to visit doctors. And the same thing with schools and education.
So after 9/11, one of the most important things we actually worked tremendously on was the Executive Order 41, which pertains to exactly what she's mentioning. Any individual who's getting the services from any type of city agency, whether it's the hospital, the police department, fire department, or any other city agency, the information that is even known or collected is not to be shared with any type of immigration or federal agencies. And that is the most important thing that at that time was being passed. And Mayor Bloomberg and then now Mayor de Blasio has upheld that and taken it even further. And is one of the most important things that is for the city. And just like with this ID NYC, this is one of those initiatives which is imperative. And the other thing that I just remembered with health, under Mayor de Blasio's initiative, Access NYC, so we were able to, COPO was one of the sites which actually for undocumented individuals, they were actually getting insurance, which was that they would have to participate in, and which was wonderful. And it's going to expand. Well, we're hoping it's going to expand now. But yeah, absolutely, people should not be afraid. There are rules and executive orders in place in the city to protect them.
And this is private information cannot be shared with law enforcement?
This is immigration status or information which is learned. Law enforcement, even NYPD, does not share it with federal authorities.
According to the Trump administration, that if you have a criminal background, criminal history, that you're more likely than others to be deported.
That's
Talk
correct.
a bit about that.
So in our legal clinics, we found out that many individuals who had minor infractions with law enforcement, at that moment, the judges weren't aware about individuals of their immigration status, and the attorneys who were legal representatives, they weren't aware about individual status. It might be a small crime, and then all of a sudden they sign a paper for 1 year, or 1 year probation, or sign something that at that moment it becomes, then that information is shared with federal authorities. So the important thing is also for our judges and also for our legal representatives who are, attorneys who are appointed by the courts, also to ask those questions, especially when minor infractions are in place, when these individuals make those mistakes. Because that's a huge category where people are going to be picked up. What, for, I don't know, for
Jumping a turnstile.
jumping a turnstile, simple things like that.
Minor infractions.
And that's what's happened. And we have to make sure,
And once that happens, they're going to be deported.
once that happens, so the information is shared with federal authorities because
Yeah.
it becomes a criminal.
And their information is in the system, and they're subject to deportation.
Exactly. That's how that happens.
So we really want to encourage people to avoid any sort of contact with law enforcement, avoid any sort of thing that you may think would be a commission of a crime. And if you're an immigrant that has a criminal record, there are places that you can reach out to. The Immigrant Defense Project is offering support for people who are either documented or undocumented that have criminal convictions. But it's important that folks are aware of their criminal record and what's on it.
Especially.
This fear, how widespread is the fear in the Muslim community, in the African community, in the Caribbean community? What other communities are in fear? I was at a town hall meeting that you were at, and there were people of all shades at that meeting.
Absolutely.
And some of them, I mean, these were white folk as well. They had their fears. Now, how widespread is this?
I think it's widespread. I mean, I feel like, as I mentioned earlier, there's certain groups that are likely more vulnerable, in particular Black immigrants, and I think that their concerns are compounded because of, one, their immigrant status, but their Blackness. There's a sense of anti-Blackness in that Black immigrants are particularly susceptible to being over-policed, to being criminalized, disproportionate to their population. But I think we've also witnessed concerns from many other immigrant groups that are just wondering, to the extent to which they will be swept up into this sort of deportation regime.
So as I mentioned, all this information is translated into several languages. So
And that's available from your organization.
it's available and it's affecting all those groups. That's why it's in those different languages.
How do people reach your organization?
They can go right to my website, copo.org, or they can call us at 718-434-3266.
Okay, we're going to make sure that that's visible for everyone. And Tiffany, your organization.
Sure, right. So the New York Immigration Coalition, there are a number of ways that people can get involved. We're actually running a campaign right now called the Our New York campaign. That's essentially a campaign, and I know you're familiar with it, where New York City is sort of working with partners and allies to affirm our commitment to immigrant New York. This is a campaign we launched, maybe just at the end of the year, very recently.
Yeah, very recently.
Yeah, and so we encourage people to get involved in the Our New York campaign. People who are interested can actually send a text to NYIC. The number is 864-237. So you would text 864-237. NYIC is the number, the phrase you would text, and that'll give you updates on how upcoming actions, or updates actually that we're sharing about ICE raids and different information.
I probably shouldn't ask this question, but I will anyhow. The guy with the bat, swinging the bat, saying Trump is in.
Yeah.
But Obama was called deporter-in-chief. What's the difference here?
So, I mean, I'm going to look at it in this way. Someone did ask me, and when I explained to him, I said, sometimes it's not what you're doing or it's how you're doing it, it's what you're saying. You're saying, so this individual, this our current president, he won on hate. I'm going to go after A, B, and C, and I'm going to do A, B, and C. I'm going to build a wall, I'm going to get the immigrants. And that's the fear, and he won on it. That's the shocking part. And I think that's what's really fearing the people. Obama, he still thought of the families, and he did the DACA program, and he wanted to also do the DAPA program, where it was uniting the families even more. But he was being, pushed back. And that's the way I'm looking at it.
If I could add, I mean, I think one important distinction, what Mohammad said is exactly correct, that Trump came in on a campaign, an anti-immigrant campaign, that was very vicious, and he made no qualms about being very public about his anti-immigrant sentiment. President Obama, as we all know, has deported more immigrants, about 2.5 million immigrants in his 8 years in office, more than any other president in the history of the United States. And I think a lot of people aren't aware of that, and it's important that people sort of keep this in context and in perspective, that in fact, he did live up to that title, Deporter-in-Chief.
Yes.
The difference, though, I think that's important to underscore is we expect to see a continuance of that policy, and we expect it to be exacerbated. And we are under no, misconceptions that Trump will not be much more diligent about breaking up families, about trying to destroy communities, about trying to criminalize those who have come here to make this place their home and their refuge. But folks like the New York Immigration Coalition, COPA, we're going to be standing on the front lines to make sure that we communicate to this administration we will not just sit by and allow that to happen.
So your warning is that people should be careful. People should not live in fear, but should be aware of what is likely to happen if they are careless. We have about a minute left, so let me give you one last word.
All right, so look, COPO is a one-stop shopping center, one-stop shop. We provide from legal services to immigration services to senior center to pre-K, all those services. One of the most important things we're emphasizing in this go bag is to have a plan of action. Plan ahead. Make sure you have documentation copied with a friend, and make sure you are able to have, if you have kids, you're able to have your kids being watched with someone.
Okay, Tiffany, you've got 30 seconds.
Absolutely. So definitely we want people to be engaged and involved in this moment, to know that there are resources out there that they can rely on. Get involved, right? Don't be fearful. Don't allow yourselves to be consumed by fear. As we've said, it's important to make a plan, to know, to have resources, for example, an immigration attorney that can assist you, to not allow yourself to fall victim to fraud, to make sure that you have a plan for your family, your children, should you be detained. And most importantly, that you know that you're aware that there are allies, advocates, people that are standing with you and that will not sit by while this president tries to change the landscape of this country.
Thank you, Tiffany Wheatland-Disu. And you're from the New York Immigration Coalition. And Mohammad Razvi, and you're from COPA, the Council of People's Organizations. Thank you for being on Brooklyn 45.
Thank you.
And you can watch this program on YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. Post your comments on our Facebook page as well, Brooklyn 45 TV, or email us at info@brooklyn45.com. That's info@brooklyn45.com. You can see this program and others, as I said before, on our YouTube page. So, on behalf of our entire Brooklyn 45 team, I'm Sam Tate.